Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. So I'm here today with a very interesting tag that I'm very excited to do. This is an original tag by Paperback Junkie, Matt and Zoe's channel, which I will link below. I was really happy to see that I was tagged in this video, so thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And I had a really good time putting these questions together, and they weren't that easy. But I was able to gather all of the books, mostly from my library. So let's get right to it. So this is called the Friday the 13th franchise book tag. So they don't have to be horror books. If you watch Paperback Junkie's video on the tag, a lot of their books that they chose weren't horror. They were all very interesting. And some of these questions were pretty difficult, but I had fun putting them together. So without further ado, why don't we get right to it? So part one, a book where the mother is the villain. So, okay, this connects with Friday the 13th, I get that. But I was trying to think of a book with a mother as a villain besides Psycho. And I guess I could have used Psycho, but I really don't have a copy of Psycho. And I've never read the book, I'm ashamed to say. Of course, I've seen the movie a million times. But looking through my shelves, I did find one book that I think fits the bill. It's not exactly fiction, although that could be argued, depending on what team you're on, Team Joan or Team Christina. But I chose Mommy Dearest by Christina Crawford, the first, I think, expose of a child of a movie star that really shattered the image of Joan Crawford. Down with me, fellas! This ain't my first time at the rodeo. Sorry about Matilda. She's having a little bit of a bad week. But anyway, back to the book. The book is really good. Actually, I think that the audiobook is on YouTube if you just want to listen to it. It has great photographs in it, some behind the scenes stuff. There's a whole, probably a subreddit, although I've never looked at it, but there's a culture around Mommy Dearest. People who think that Christina is a liar and Joan didn't do anything wrong. Now, of course, this book came out after Joan died. You know, she wasn't there to give her side of the story or to defend herself, but I think it's pretty accurate. I mean, Joan had a horrendous childhood herself, and she worked herself up from nothing. Joan Crawford was the ultimate movie star, probably the greatest movie star of all time, in that she was there spanning the very beginning of picture making in the 20s when she started out as a young hoofer in silent films, all the way up to when she was an older dame through, Grand Dame Guignol and beyond. She was a trooper. And of course, I'm such a fan. I did watch Feud, which I enjoyed very much. I thought Jessica Lange's performance as Joan Crawford was especially excellent. So I chose Mommy Dearest for this first one, where Mommy is the villain. Okay, part two, a book in the backwoods. For this one, I chose a book I read pretty recently in the last year, and that's The Jersey Devil by Shea, which takes place in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, where the Jersey Devil lives. And I've told the story before, but I'm pretty sure I saw the Jersey Devil, and my husband was there too, so it wasn't just me and my imagination. When we were in the Pine Barrens one night back in the early 1980s. I thought this book was a lot of fun. I know that Shea is known for doing like monster stories. This is the only book of his I ever read, but I certainly would read more. And I know he's got his fans here on BookTube. And what I really liked about this book is I felt like he really captured the Pineys. It's a very unique place, and it's certainly a place where you can imagine Bigfoot or the Jersey Devil residing. So that was my choice for part two. Okay, part three, a book with a masked character. Okay, this was hard because I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head. So I went through my shelves and I found a book that I haven't read, and I don't even know if this is a literal mask, but it does say The Mask by Dean Koontz. So I'm going to go with The Mask. I've had this book for a while. I've never read it. Let me know in the comments below if you have read it, if there really is a character who wears a mask. I read the back and it doesn't really seem like it says they wear a mask, but I'm taking this very literally, so I'm going to go with this book. I don't know if it's part of the tag that you are supposed to have read all these books, but I don't know. I'm just going to go with it. All right, number 4. A book with the best final chapter. Okay, I'm going to go with one of my favorite books that I've talked about on this channel before. I know I get a little obsessive about it, but I just love this story. I think it's great, and it has a great twist at the end and a great final chapter, and that's Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon. This is a great piece of fiction and a great horror story. Very well researched by Thomas Tryon. He's one of my favorites, and no one really talks about him anymore, which is a shame because he's a really good writer. So Harvest Home is about this family who leaves the big city to live in a quaint New England town called Cornwall, and it's based on ancient agrarian culture. And at first they think, oh, isn't this cute? Isn't this quaint? Aren't these people charming in their old ways? But it's a lot more sinister than that. And it becomes very sinister at the end. And there really is a great twist. It is a very well-crafted book. And I always come back to this. It's also a wonderful book to read in the autumn. So I'm going to go with Harvest Home for that. Okay, so the next one, Part 5, a series book that changes its protagonist from the first book. I haven't read that many series, but I'm going to go with the first one that came to mind, and that's The Witching Hour by Anne Rice, because I just finished reading, well, I read the first book again, and then I just finished rereading book 2, Lasher, and I'll probably read the next book. I haven't liked the series as much the second time reading it as I did years ago, but the protagonists do change from book to book, so I'm going to go with that. I do have all the Witching Hour books and the Reader's Guide, which is kind of a tome in and of itself. I wouldn't even say I have a love-hate relationship with Anne Rice, but I'm always drawn back to her work, but I always find it somewhat disappointing, if that makes sense. Part 6, a book with someone or something resurrected from death. Well, the first that came to mind, and I don't have a good copy of it, I only have it on Kindle, that's on my wish list, is Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. There's also a lovely, and the last time I looked it was still there, a lovely audiobook narrated by Clive Barker, and I'm in love with his voice, on YouTube that I think is still there. But of course, the character of Frank, I guess he kind of dies. He's basically torn apart and just like scattered with pieces of blood and flesh all over the room, the creepy room. And then the blood resurrects him. So I think that probably fits. So I'm going to go with Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. And I love the movie and I love the book. I wouldn't say I love all the movies. I love the first 2 movies. Then they really get kind of off the rails and crazy. All right, Part 7, a book with a character with telekinesis. Okay, well, I thought of Carrie, of course, but I didn't want to go with the obvious. So I went with another Stephen King, Firestarter. Now, maybe technically it's pyrokinesis with the little girl Charlie, but I think her parents also have telekinesis. So this is a great book, and I had an Audible credit, so I got the Audible book, and I've been listening to it while I've been outside gardening, and I just had forgotten how good it is. And the movie's fun too. Stephen King has written quite a few books about telekinesis or psychic powers. I'm thinking Carrie, Firestarter, The Institute, which I read when it came out maybe a year or 2 ago, and I guess The Shining also would count for that. If there are any other Stephen King books that have telekinesis in it, which there might be, I haven't read all his books. I would love to know if you know, put it in the comments below because I'm interested how this kind of weaves the same theme, especially after having read The Institute and now reading this. There are a lot of similarities. I remember in Carrie how Stephen King would have these like articles and letters and reports inserted into the story about different psychic phenomena. And I felt like this kind of developed that theme a little more. It's about a couple who, because they're broke in college, it's kind of like the Stanford University experiments. And it kind of also reminded me of Altered States, where they get into a program, like a drug pilot program. And so they're test subjects. And it's like they take an LSD, which changes their pituitary gland. And now they have psychic abilities. But because they have a child, she's really got it. So this little girl can set fires, especially when she gets mad. Drew Barrymore played her in the movie. Some of you might remember. But listening to this book again, and I might also read a little bit, it's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. He's so good. Like, he's such a good writer. It's really humbling. Okay, next, a book that takes place in New York. All right, there were several choices I could have made for this one, but I decided to go with Audrey Rose by Frank de Folita. This is a nice copy. It is a great film, too, with Anthony Hopkins. This is about a little girl who is reincarnated by another little girl who dies tragically. And it all takes place in New York City. And the way they describe New York, it's kind of like the older New York from the 70s, but it has a very New York feel. So, yep, I'm going to go with Audrey Rose. Okay, next. A book that takes place in hell. Again, Clive Barker, I'm thinking. But I went with the second part, or has something to do with the occult. Well, I love books about the occult. And so I chose one that's really good and also a great movie. And that is The Mephisto Waltz by Fred Mustard Stewart. I have two different versions of this. I like this book cover too. I kind of like the old photographic book covers. This is another book that takes place in New York, although the movie takes place in California, like Malibu. It's really good. It's a fun read. It's a short read. It has a definite Rosemary's Baby feel to it, a structure just like Rosemary's Baby. So it was definitely influenced by it, but it puts its own kind of spin on it. And I really enjoyed it. So yeah, check out The Mephisto Waltz. It's a great movie. It's very psychedelic and wonderful. All right, part 10, a book that takes place in space. Well, I have a science fiction shelf, and it's pretty neglected as far as I don't read as much science fiction as I'm not saying as I should, but I do read it every once in a while. So I just went for the first one I saw, and that was Alien, the novelization, and this is by Alan Dean Foster, who wrote a lot of novelizations of movies. And there's a whole Alien series of books, like newer books, which I have not read. But this was fun. I love Alien. It's probably my favorite horror film. It's hard to say if it's my favorite, but it's certainly my favorite sci-fi horror movie. And what's not to love about Alien? So yeah, it definitely takes place in space, because in space, no one can hear you scream. Part 11, a book that has characters from different franchises, or a mashup. This was the hardest one for me because I don't read a lot of franchises, and I certainly don't read a lot of mashups. I don't think I've ever read like an intentional mashup like the Jane Austen zombie stuff. I've never read those. If they're good, they're probably pretty good, but I just haven't gotten around to reading it, or maybe I just felt like it might be a little dumb. I did see a funny one on Goodreads that had a really low rating. It was a spoof, I suppose, on Dorian Gray, like the 50 Shades of Dorian Gray or something, I don't know. But I thought about this one, and I decided the only thing I had close in my library that I think has that kind of mashup are the Anne Rice series, the Vampire series, and the Witching Hours series do cross paths. And just to check to see which place they cross paths in, I turned to my Witch's Companion, and the Talamasca, which is the think tank or the watch group that has been studying the Mayfair witches for centuries, is first mentioned in The Queen of the Damned. So I think this might work for that, where we have characters from both stories kind of crossing paths. So apparently this happens in The Queen of the Damned, which I have not read yet. That is the next book in the Vampire Chronicles that I plan to read very soon. I'm doing another video this week about my reading and how it's been all over the place, but Queen of the Damned has been sitting next to my computer for months, and I will get to it eventually. So the next one is part 12, a book that is a retelling. So I grabbed this one because I thought this is an obvious retelling, but I have not read it. But it looks really interesting, and that is Dean Koontz's Frankenstein. If you've read this, let me know in the comments below, what you think, if it's good, if it's worth reading. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is probably my favorite book, along with Jane Eyre. But I'm curious to see what Dean Koontz would do with this story. Part 13, a book that you found in a thrift shop or antique shop. Well, that could be a lot of books in here, but I tried to pick something that I found in the wild that was a really cool pick, and that is Spawn by Sean Hudson, just because of that amazing cover. I know this book was featured in Paperbacks from Hell, so when I found it, I was like, yes! I haven't read it yet, but that cover's just fantastic. So I finally got to the end. I have a pile of books here, and now it's time to tag some people. So I thought I would tag my Creepy Cocktail Hour ladies, and they are Lydia from Typical Books, Alex the Bookubus, Merce from Harpies in the Trees, and Marie McWilliams. I would love to hear their thoughts on these questions, and I would love to hear yours. If you haven't been tagged, please feel free to do this tag, and let's spread it around a little bit. So let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books. I would love to hear your thoughts, or have seen any of these movies that go along with these books. And that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.